Hello everybody, Raven Knight here, back with another story sharing episode. I wanted to do a short one today, but this story keeps coming up in my mind right now. Many people ask me, hey Raven, do you play D&D? Do you play Dungeons and Dragons? Have you ever done that? You'd probably be really good at it. Here's the funny thing. I've played it once or twice, but to be perfectly honest, according to Lark, I apparently was designing a Dungeons and Dragons story and setup way before I'd even considered playing the game. That was in a story that I was writing and would like to one day return to, called New Epoch, or Epoch, or however you want to pronounce it. New Epoch, or Epoch, is the story of a fantasy world that came from our world. Have you ever heard of isekai anime? Isekai anime is an anime where the whole plot centers around a character, usually a high school or young adult boy, who gets sucked into a fantasy RPG-style world, either by dying and reincarnating, being teleported, or what have you. Good examples are ones like Sword Art Online, Rising of the Shield Hero, That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, etc., etc. Now, here's the thing. I took isekai anime and I thought to myself, what if instead of a single person being sucked into a brand new world was the plot? What if instead the world as we know it transformed into a fantasy world? So all of us were trapped in a fantasy setting. And that's what I did. Basically, the setup is that in the year 2042, or somewhere around that time period, sometime in the future, the world goes through something called the Great Calamity. And for an entire month, the world suffers catastrophic geological events of unexplained origin. Tsunamis, tornadoes, earthquakes, monsoons, massive shifts in geological regions. An area that was once desert and flat is now mountainous and rainy. An area that was once beautiful and lush is now a wasteland. Lakes and oceans change, continents change shape. It's massively different. Animals, that even domesticated animals that we once trusted, become hostile and vicious. Some of them changing shape and size, becoming bigger and more vicious, kind of like the kind of monsters you'd see in an RPG setting. The world is overrun by vegetation, man-eating plants. Trees overgrow the buildings and cities. It looks a lot like what you'd see like if a city were overgrown by plants, like an abandoned city, kind of like The Last of Us, kind of like that kind of setup. Only think about it much further in the future. And worse yet, about 40% of the human population in the world go through mutations of their own, transforming into different races of fantasy-like races. You've got humans, of course, which make up 60% of the population. You've got elves. You've got dwarves. You've got nereids, which are fish people. You've got halflings. You've got ogres. And you got orcs. Those are the primary races that I created for this story. And from this chaos and insanity, riots erupt. Governments fall down, religious institutions and other institutions of commerce and equality collapse. The world basically falls in on itself. Everything is just pandemonium. After all that happens, for about a year or two of chaos, from that comes a new world order where everything's a feudalistic society. The lands are broken up into different segments and towns and regions controlled by warlords or governors or kings and queens of their own people. Some people break off according to their race and decide we're going to be a nation of elves and we're not going to let anyone else in because elves are superior. Others become only orcs or ogres or stuff like that. Others try to live together in harmony, try to live amongst each other, but with a lot of problems inherent in it. And the only form of government that exists now that is all-encompassing, the only form of religious institution, is the Vatican. Because during the calamity, a lot of people ran to the Vatican, the church, for direction. They didn't have any answers, so eventually the Vatican broke down into three different groups. You got the Seekers of Light, the Children of Christ, and the Inquisition of Holiness. Though they all represent the church, they all work for different things. The Seekers of Light are a part of the church denomination that they believe that all of this calamity can be reversed somehow. So they basically seclude themselves from the rest of the world. They don't get involved in politics or evangelism or anything like that. They just kind of shelter themselves away and work on trying to find a cure for the calamity and try to reverse the changes. The Children of Christ believe that God's mercy and love is still free to all peoples and races, so they're trying to spread the message of Christ to everybody and try to bring peace and harmony back to these troubled times. But the Inquisition of Holiness is quite the opposite. They believe that the calamity is a result of God's wrath, and that only through purging the different races and the monsters of the world and putting humans on top again will God finally be satisfied. So they're the militaristic aspect of the church, and so they go around policing and taxing other races and trying to force them to assimilate or accommodate them. Kind of the idea of the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church throughout history. That was kind of the goal there. But the idea was that this is the way the world works now. Everything broken up. Technology's a thing of the past. There's no more gasoline, no more internet, no more any of that. It's a feudalistic fantasy-style world built on top of what was once a prosperous, civilized, technological world. Fast forward about 10 to 15 years into the future, and you follow a group of people who have gone through changes themselves. And here's the thing, the changes don't just stop at race. Some people aged up, like they gained years of age. They may have lost years of age. They might have changed genders. They might have changed skin color. They might have changed personality to some degree. Changes were sporadic. So you got a dwarf who used to be a college student who gained like 30 years. So now he's like 50 years old. Short, squat, has a long beard. He works as a blacksmith in this town called Orkshire. You got his best friend, who used to be a young college-age guy himself. He's now a female 25-year-old ogre, and she's just trying to make her way. She's just trying to live in this civilization, in this town that sees her as a monster. You've got a elf girl. It previously was just a girl working her way to get a master's degree. Now she's an elf bard that serves an orc overlord against her will. You've got a guy who actually lost 10 years of his life to be a kid. He had to grow up over those 10 years and is now an alchemist. Like I said, it's a very colorful collection of characters, all of which have suffered thanks to the effects of the calamity, and they're just trying to figure out how to live in this new environment. They've mostly gotten used to certain aspects of it, but they've been bogged down in this town called Orkshire. But what they want to do is escape it. They want to escape this town and go see what's happened to the rest of the world. The problem is Orkshire is owned by an orc war boss named Josiah, and the orc war boss ain't letting nobody leave. So they've got to find a way to beat Josiah and then get out of town so that they can see the rest of the world. The story had a lot of ideas that I didn't directly rip off of D&D because I didn't know anything about it, but according to Lark and a few others who know about the story, this could make for a great setting for Dungeons and Dragons. The characters themselves, I really loved fleshing out because all of them are based on different people that I know in the real world. Like one of them is based off of Lark, another one is based off of my friend Aaron, another one is based off of Hannah, another one is based off of another friend of mine from way back in college. I've got a bunch of characters in here who are all based off of people I know. So it's been a very fun story. A very fun trial and error kind of thing, writing these different personalities clashing off of each other. Some people ask me, hey, Raven, how do you come up with ideas for stories? And this one, when I came up with the idea for this one, I don't know what I was thinking. I really don't know. I don't know what direct influence created it. I just felt like, you know what, I'd really like a story where the world that we know of technology and order and structure caved to a more medieval, feudalistic, magic-based world, and how would people react to that? If you were a person who was, like, let's say that you lived in this world, right, and the calamity hits, and you become something totally different from yourself. Let's say you went from a normal human guy to, like, Titania, the ogre girl. You went from, you turn into that. Everyone hates ogres. How do you live within this world where everyone's afraid of you because they think you're a deadly creature? How do you feel about being in a new environment that you don't understand? How do you feel about not having the technology that you used to depend on day-to-day life? All of these questions, how do you solve some of these problems? Do you gain the instincts and fortitude necessary to live? Or do you commit suicide because you just can't possibly comprehend living in this world of hopelessness? And there are lots of characters who do, not directly in the story, but a lot of people during the cataclysm who did take their own lives because they just couldn't deal with it. And then there's also questions about the church. Like, of course, the children of Christ are trying to help people, but they're not a military. What happens when someone attacks the innocent? Well, you send in the Inquisition. But the Inquisition isn't exactly perfect. They believe in man's superiority, and they want to crush any non-human resistance. Then what about the monsters that dwell in the forest, the huge creatures and monsters that you'd see in fantasy-style RPG games? How do you deal with them? Aren't they a threat? But what if they used to be someone or something you knew? What if them used to be a pet of yours? Or what if one of them was a human who went crazy and went deranged? There are lots of ways that you could turn this story into something either darker or more hopeful or more expansive. And the funny thing is, when I was writing the story, I was only concerned with a particular area of the United States. Imagine what happened around the rest of the world. What does China look like? What does Africa look like? What does Australia look like? What is Russia? What is Britain? What is Spain? What is France? What is Germany? All these countries, all these places. Heck, what does Japan look like? That'd be crazy, right? What do all these places look like after all this calamity? It's a really engaging idea. And I think that's the real strength about this story. Not so much the characters of the story itself, but that you could have so many stories within this world. The very concept of this world is the potential for many stories to be placed within it. Yes, I told the story of a few specific characters and what they do. But you, or any aspiring writer, could take this world and make their own story in it. The sky's the limit. And that was one of the things that I loved about making this world. One of the things about making these characters. And of course, you got Titania, you got Grognar, you got Mirabelle, you got Blemish, you got all these characters that I created and who have their own stories to tell. But it's just this concept that I really, really was proud of. The reason I haven't been working on it in a while is because, ironically, despite me being in love with the concept, not a lot of my friends were that involved with it. It might have been different if I treated it more like a D&D campaign and I kind of let them have autonomy over what their own characters did. But to be fair, I did kind of start the story without a lot of their consent. I kind of did say, hey, I'm writing the story and you're one of the characters. I am? Yeah, you are. Well, what do I look like? Here's what you look like. That's not what I would have picked. Well, it's what you are. It's kind of one of those things. But I had a lot of fun designing this and creating it. If you like this idea, you can check out the link to the story as it is so far in the description. I'll leave it there for you guys. It is called New Epoch or Epic, however you want to pronounce it. I've been told many times it's pronounced one of two ways. I've heard there's actually a British and an American way to pronounce it, and the two ways are a little different, but that's not the point. If you have ideas for kind of stories you'd like to see in this world, you can share those in the comments too, if you're so inclined. Would love to talk more about this story. It's one that I really love because of just the possibilities that it provides. It's a great setting for a story. So yeah, that is New Epoch. I hope that y'all like this little story sharing period. I hope that you enjoy the concept that I gave. And as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.